I think it's fantastic that on a Sunday morning in the rain, we're all here to talk about how to make society better and to look at all the challenges that we're facing. And the one I want to talk about, as you've heard, and there's the clue right there, is the impact of technology on how not just this generation, but future generations will be thinking and feeling. I love this particular picture of the brain because it reminds me of when I first dissected a human brain, and I've told this story many times. And I held the brain just like in this picture, although I was wearing surgical gloves, but I remember thinking, had I not been wearing surgical gloves, what would have happened if a bit of that brain tissue had dislodged under my fingernail? Would that be the bit that somebody loved with? Would it be an emotion? Can you have love under your fingernail? Can you have the habit of biting your fingernails under your fingernail? Yeah. It is the most astonishing privilege to be able to dissect the human brain, and yet it does drive you mad. One of the implications of this, these ruminations as one thinks about the physical brain and how it works and how it's affected, is really to consider the future. What awaits us? Are we going to be like this? I often think this is how people think of scientists, you know, devoid of all humanity, robotic-like creatures, in one sense performing very well, but in another sense somehow missing out on some quintessential feature that we really value. Or are we going to be like this, free spirits in our own world, meandering around in some alternative reality? So what I'd like to explore in the 16.30 minutes that remain, which is quite scary, is just how we can take these thoughts forward. And the first is that the environment is key. This is from Innocent Drinks, and really I'm just showing you this because clearly companies such as Innocent are very mindful that the environment will change how you think and feel. Look at the effort they've gone to give their workforce a pleasing and stimulating and unusual, interesting environment. So let's think about, oh gracious, let's think about that. When you're born as a baby, it's a great privilege to be born as a human as opposed to, say, a goldfish, because you'll have the chance to have a personality. And let's be brutal, goldfish don't have great personalities, do they? If one died, you could go and buy another one, and your kid brother or sister would come back, and they wouldn't know any difference. Whereas you couldn't do that with a pet cat or dog, and you certainly couldn't do it with other brothers or sisters. And the reason is that we occupy more ecological niches than any other species on the planet, not because we run fast or see well, we're not particularly strong, but we do something fantastically. We adapt to our environment. And if you have individual experiences by adapting to your environment, then guess what? You're going to become an individual. So even if you're a clone, that's to say an identical twin, you are going to be unique. You're unique anyway because for the 100,000 years we've stalked this planet, no one will have a brain like yours, nor will they ever again, unlike the goldfish. And this is due to something called plasticity. It doesn't mean, of course, that the brain is made of plastic. It comes from the Greek plastikos, to be molded. And this, I would like to suggest to you, is the basis of what we call the mind. So here you are, the blobby bits of the brain cells, the stringy bits of the connections. This is the newborn human brain. And you can see that within a very short period of time, within the first 2 years of life, the astonishing feature that accounts for the growth of the human brain postnatally is not the mere proliferation of brain cells, it is the connections between them. So even if you're an identical twin with the same genes, you're still going to be unique because these connections are driven and strengthened and forced and shaped by your individual interaction with the environment. So let's just think what that might mean. I think these connections are important that you're going to make in your unique brain because you'll be able to interpret the world in a special way. Take something like this. A small baby will be attracted to this gold shiny thing. It might want to put it in its mouth. It might roll it. It won't mean anything apart from that it's a gold shiny thing. But as the weeks turn to months, turn to years, and as the connections form in the brain, as they interact with this object, so the child will learn this is something that goes on fingers. And as they become more sophisticated and have more experience, they'll learn that a gold shiny thing that looks like this only goes on one finger only. And it only goes on one finger under certain circumstances that therefore symbolize or mean something if you see someone wearing one. And then eventually they might acquire one of their own, looking perhaps generic like this. But that particular object will be even more special to them, well, at least in the early stages. Perhaps as they go from the honeymoon to the divorce, things might change. But this object could have been the most important thing to them in their lives, and yet it's something a baby would put in its mouth, meaningless. Why? The intrinsic properties have not changed. It's what's got. So I must not wave my arm around, obviously. I'll wait just a second. Because of what's going on up here. Why am I showing you a ghost? Similarly, if I'd come on today going woo, woo, like this, that would have confirmed your views of neuroscientists, probably. The reason I'm showing it to you is because, again, if you showed this to a small child, they would probably be very frightened. Incidentally, if you showed it to someone with dementia, who also is lacking the connections that are going to grow as your brain grows, again, they would be very frightened. Why? Because they're taking this at face value. Therefore, it could be life-threatening. You, with your sophisticated brain connections, your lifetime of experience, can interpret beyond face value what is going on. So connections in your brain, these personalized connections, free you up from the press of the senses. They free you up from just having to react to something at face value. They free you up from mere sensation to what we would call cognition, to have a cognitive take on the world, from the Latin cogito, I think. So here you are living your life. Oh, here we all are. We've all got a unique trajectory. We all have a past, a present, and hopefully a future, a sequence of cause-effect steps that is our life story. We talk about a life story. And it's this that makes you so special and so unique. And these sequence of events gradually will embed themselves almost literally on your brain, so that now you will interpret the world, you will understand it, you will navigate it, you will plan it in a unique way. And all of this is due to your brain cell connections. So I'd like to suggest to you that the biological basis of the mind is not some airy-fairy alternative to the squalor of the physical brain. I'm not even moving and it's doing this. Squalor of the physical brain. It is the personalization of the brain through the unique dynamic configurations of your neuronal connections driven by your experiences. So let's unpack it now into search engines. World Economic Forum, which is just ending today this year, last year on their global risks, you know this is the good and great who collect in Davos, and they have a risks of the list that's going to threaten humanity. And among these things was the digital wildfires, what they called the issues of being hyper-connected. Now, I know everyone takes it as an article of faith. Oh, it's great to be connected. We're all connected. Let me challenge that. Do you really want to be connected to people all the time? Don't you ever want time to just be on your own, to reflect, to think, to look at the wall? Why must we always have this incessant output to everyone? I know you were invited to tweet. I would say, why not just listen for a while? I remember being at breakfast with Nick Clegg, well, not just me and him, but there's a whole point, there's a table. And the lady next to me was so busy tweeting that she was having breakfast with Nick Clegg. She wasn't listening to what Nick Clegg was saying, let alone thinking about it. Yeah? So we tend to be in a world where we have an audience perpetually, where one feels one has to connect and interact constantly. I don't have time really to go into in depth why I get worried by that, but let's just reflect on there may be some downside to it, not least the spread of misinformation that you haven't had chance to verify or think about or challenge on your own before you have to give some reaction back. Another issue with search engines and just looking things up is that if you have a very subtle and abstract word, how will you actually really appreciate what it means? If you were trying to explain honor, say, to a Martian or to a very small child, and you went onto Google and you got these images up, do you think they'd understand what honor was? Do you think they'd understand what honor was? Whereas if they read Mort D'Arthur by Mallory, for example, they might have more of a likelihood of understanding what honor was. So abstract concepts, I think, are things, and metaphors are not automatically available as icons. And are we driving the next generation to think iconically all the time, when really we want them to just stare at the wall and reflect for a while? Similarly, if one behaves manipulating icons all the time, then I would suggest perhaps they don't have the same meaning as when they can be related to other things. Remember the wedding ring, remember the ghost, remember your own life story. Things have a meaning if they can relate to other things, I would like to suggest to you. So if you play a computer game to rescue a princess like this, do you actually care about the princess? I bet you don't care about her. You don't care about what she's going to do with her life. You don't care about her relationships. You don't care about her future. Whereas when you read Princess Marie and Tolstoy, you care about the princess. Why? Because she has relationships like you. She has a past like you. She has a life story like you. She has a future, hopefully, like you. And therefore, she has a meaning like you. And that's why you carry on turning the pages. Otherwise, you wouldn't bother reading the book. So what we need is a context, a framework in which we can place events, objects, and people, because otherwise they're simple icons. They have no significance or meaning. Someone shares my thoughts here. I worry that the level of interrupt, the sort of overwhelming rapidity of information, is in fact affecting cognition. It's affecting deeper thinking. I still believe that sitting down and reading a book is the best way to learn something. I worry that we're losing that. That was from the chairman of Google. Okay. Yeah, see, it's okay. It's okay to think these things. So on to gaming very quickly. This is someone with an attention problem. And what we know is the increase in methylphenidate has been soaring. This is the generic name for drugs such as Ritalin, which are prescribed for ADHD. And as you can see, as you know, I'm sure that in many countries, doctors might be prescribing more liberally, the condition might be more medicalized now. But I'd like to suggest, not mutually exclusively, is if you have a young brain with the evolutionary mandate, as the human brain has, to adapt to the environment, and that brain is placed in an environment that is very fast-paced, requiring a little attention span, where you move on to the next thing, you interact very fast, the brain will obligingly adapt to that, and then you put that same child in an environment where it has to concentrate for a long period of time. It won't have rehearsed that skill, therefore it won't be very good at it. And just to back up this idea, incidentally, I'm going to show you throughout these blue flashes. These are different papers from peer-reviewed science journals showing, in one case here, a relationship to video game exposure and attention, and another one, a bidirectional causality between attentional problems and video gaming. This is someone who's being aggressive. And again, it's a great debate, are video games making people aggressive? Well, sadly, the top 5 video games released last year were all violent ones. Moreover, we know this is a meta-analysis recently summarizing 136 papers that in 381 independent tests that therefore covered 130,000 subjects. The conclusion was that yes, violent content video games causes desensitization to aggression, increased arousal, aggressive cognition, and aggressive behavior. That's not to say you go out and murder someone or you're a psychopath, but it's if you bump into someone in the corridor after playing such a game, instead of saying, oh, excuse me, you'll say, who do you think you're shoving? That kind of attitude. Something we're all familiar with. Addiction. I'm not a great necessarily proponent of the Telegraph, but I just thought this was a rather nice headline, and it was describing the paper shown on the right, where it was looking at scans of brains showing that kids that were playing a lot of video games had changes in their brain similar to that seen in compulsive gambling, and indeed, a further paper has shown similarities to people who are drug addicted. The key area is that yellow area. I don't have a pointer. I hope you can see it in the center at the bottom, which is enlarged. It's enlarged because it's been working hard, and it's been working hard because it releases a special chemical that I'm sure you'll have heard of that's related to excitement, to drug addiction, and indeed, that's what a reward looks like, in case you wondered. And reward. And this chemical I'm sure you've all heard of. It's common. It's a very hard-working chemical in the brain. It's called dopamine. And we know that dopamine acts like a fountain in the brain to do many things. But what it does is it inhibits, among other things, a very important part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. You don't really have to remember the name, just think of the front of the brain inhibits it. Why this is particularly important and interesting is that if you look at other conditions with an underactive prefrontal cortex, then you'll find, funnily enough, people who have a high body mass index, people who are heavy relative to their height, actually have an underactive prefrontal cortex. And such people, interestingly enough, are compulsive, much more addicted to gambling. They're much more reckless in gambling tasks. Now, what could eating a lot and being addicted to gambling have in common, along with this underactive prefrontal cortex? Well, a clue might come from, if you look at schizophrenia, which is yet another condition, a different scenario altogether, where, again, there is an underactive prefrontal cortex. What on earth could be in common between these three things? Well, perhaps the clue comes from looking at these cats painted by someone with schizophrenia where the condition was deteriorating, not in artistic terms perhaps, but at least in psychiatric terms. Everyone would recognize, obviously, top left as a cat. By the time you get to bottom right, no one would recognize that. It's an abstract conglomeration. Perhaps that's a clue. Because when you're eating a lot, anyone who eats, there's probably a tweet coming in even as we speak, anyone who eats knows the consequence of eating, but the thrill of the food trumps the consequence you're going to get fat. Anyone who gambles knows the consequence of gambling, but the thrill of the horse past the finishing post or the roll of the dice trumps the consequences. You're going to lose your money. What's that got to do with the schizophrenia? Well, look, the cat started off, we would say, as a cognitive cat. But by the time we get to deterioration of the condition, it's now a conglomerate of the senses. So could an underactive prefrontal cortex actually be a scenario where a common factor is the press of the senses? The thrill of the moment trumps the consequences. You are there very much interacting with the environment out of context with your life narrative. And it's no coincidence that this underactive prefrontal cortex is also a feature of early human being. As you grow, only in late teenage years do you have a fully matured prefrontal cortex. So again, we can see that there's a similarity here, a certain connection between the press of the moment. Now, what's very interesting, bear in mind dopamine inhibits the prefrontal cortex anyway. It's released when you're addicted or aroused. So we can imagine intense stimulation of the video screen mandates a fast response because you're interacting. Therefore, you're very excited, you're highly aroused, more dopamine is released. This underlies reward-seeking addictive behavior. More dopamine is released, which inhibits your prefrontal cortex, bringing about the same kinds of scenarios. It's got time alerts. The same kinds of scenarios as in schizophrenia and obesity in childhood, which means you'll have a drive now for sensation over cognition, which means the screen will offer you something that perhaps the boring old real world doesn't offer, and therefore you'll go on to the video games. Very briefly, can I have a few more minutes, whoever's chairing this, because there was a hiccup with the sounding. Social networking sites, when you meet someone face-to-face, words only actually have 10% of input. But eye contact, body language, voice, pheromones, these are those sneaky chemicals that one smells. Physical contact, no, you don't literally smell them, but you subconsciously smell. So you say, oh, the chemistry wasn't right, I just didn't get on with them, or somehow we just gelled, the chemistry was right. That's pheromones. Anyway, eye contact, body language, voice, pheromones, and physical contact, all of which contribute to you having a good interpersonal relationship, both professionally and personally. All those things, which are so important for empathy, of course, are not available on Facebook. So if you take especially a young person who is choosing to communicate or have social relationships made that way, when are they going to rehearse those things? And if they don't rehearse them, they're not going to be good at them because you're only good at what you rehearse. Small wonder, therefore, that empathy has dropped over the last 30 years, particularly accelerated in the last 10, which coincides with the rise of the digital native. Very controversially, people have now started to look at connections between people who have a natural disposition anyway to have problems with empathy, to see if there could be some kind of connection between the screen and, I will stress, autistic-like tendencies. I'm not saying autism, autistic-like tendencies. First, there's a link between atypical brainwave responses. People with autistic-like behaviors have a problem in differentiating tables from faces in terms of the importance they attach to them. Second, there's a link between autistic spectrum disorders and this underfunctioning prefrontal cortex we've just looked at. Third, there's a link between early screen experiences and later development of autism, a link between autistic conditions and the appeal of screen technologies. And my own view there is that the playing field's level. All of us are autistic-like on the screen because we're not using those other interpersonal skills that only come for face-to-face interaction. And finally, a link between autistic spectrum disorder and compulsive video game use. The references are there, so please don't shoot the messenger. I'm just showing them to you. Finally, identity. I love this history of blogging, which tells you, I think, about how we might see ourselves nowadays. 99, I just have to tell this thing about my cat did today. 2004, my God, cat pictures. You know what's coming, don't you? 2005, moving cat pictures, and then that pinnacle of civilization, Twitter. 1 p.m., cat just sneezed. 1:02, cat sneezed again. 1:04, cat hasn't sneezed, getting worried. This reminds me so much of young children. Look at me, I'm doing this. Look at me, I'm doing that. I'm putting on myself. Because if you don't look at me, me. If you don't look at me, how do we know I exist? So could people that tweet a lot be in existential crisis that they need constantly? And indeed, again, a backup thing, this obsession with the self, we've all heard about the selfie these days, there are peer-reviewed papers coming out show an increase in narcissism, sadly accompanied by low self-esteem. Finally, Sir John Beddington, the science advisor to the government, was so worried that last year he commissioned a report on future identities, which is the impact of social networking sites. At last, then, how can we realize the full potential of the human mind in the digital age with eyeglass about to descend on us, where your world will never be the same again, where you'll have all this extra information? It'd be like being on permanent Facebook. This I couldn't resist including. It's a 60-year-old quote from Isaac Asimov. Even so, this is from 1954, mankind will suffer badly from the disease of boredom, a disease spreading more widely each year and growing in intensity. This will have serious mental, emotional, and sociological consequences. And I dare say that psychiatry will be far and away the most important medical speciality in 2014. The lucky few who can be involved in creative work of any sort will be the true elite of mankind, for they alone will do more than serve a machine. 60 years ago. So that leaves us then, if you agree that we want all to be creative, no one wants to be just serving machines. I've called this mind change because I think there's comparisons with climate change in that both are global, without question, both are controversial, both are multifaceted. In the brief talk today, you've seen that I've drawn parallels with social networking and video gaming and search engines, rather like with climate change we have carbon sequestration, water shortages, alternative energy and the like. In both cases, rather clunkily, it's in our hands, as shown here, to do something, but with climate change, it's a question of damage and limitation, but mind change doesn't have to be like that. I'm much thought of as being some grumpy old luddite, but I constantly say, surely we should be harnessing these technologies. You've got a chance, your generation have a chance more than any other, to really answer these big questions of how we can stretch ourselves as people as never before, unlike all other generations. We have the technology, we have the leisure, we have the health, a long lifespan to really stretch ourselves as people in a way that no other generation had the privilege to do. And it's unprecedented. So here's what I'd like to see. Surveys, much more surveys about what people are thinking and feeling. Epidemiology, just so we know exactly who's doing what, and then looking at the causality between empathy and social networking, say. Basic research on brain mechanisms. I'd obviously say that because I'm a brain scientist and I like money for research. Innovative software. I'd love to hear from someone who'd like to partner to harness this software. If people are so wedded to screens, let's use them, not just to play violent video games, but to try and help people enhance their empathy, their sense of identity, and above all, to develop these conceptual frameworks that give you an individual meaning to your life and a significance that is not there just with an icon on the screen. And finally, we do need, and that's why it's so great everyone's here today, to develop a dialogue and as many discussions as possible for developing a really fulfilling environment for increasing empathy, a sense of identity, and above all, creativity, so that Asimov could have looked back and said, no, I was wrong, they're all elite. For those of you who want to see all the references, this is a shameless plug for my website, but really it's there. If you go to Science Screen Technology reading list, it's because I'm aware a lot of what I've said is controversial. Many people say there's no evidence. Here you will find about 400 references to make up your own mind. Thank you very much.